Welcome back. I'm Matthew. This is Dark Ascent, and today I'll be covering Stacy's who thought the rules of Everest didn't apply to them and ended up paying the price for it. From a Stacy who attacked the Sherpa trying to help her to a woman who unclipped from her permitted route and tried to conquer Everest alone, which definitely had the most stupid yet devastating outcome I've ever covered. It was April 19th, 2017, and the air at Everest Base Camp carried the metallic edge of snow that had melted and refrozen overnight. The temperature sat around 24 degrees Fahrenheit, with gusts pushing through the Khumbu Glacier strong enough to rattle tent poles and send loose equipment skidding across ice. Prayer flags strung between expedition clusters snapped in bursts, their frayed edges worn thin by seasons of wind and ultraviolet light. The camp was deep into its rhythm. Teams had been on the mountain for weeks, and the icefall doctors had established and maintained the route through the Khumbu since early April. Lauren Shale arrived 3 weeks late. She was 41 years old, a corporate consultant from Denver who had rebranded herself as an adventure athlete after guided trips up Kilimanjaro and a partial ascent of Elbrus. 2 expedition companies had rejected her Everest application for insufficient experience. A third, a budget operator in Kathmandu with a reputation for flexibility, declined at first but reversed the decision after Lauren wired an additional payment to the owner's personal account. The operator reassigned an unused permit from a canceled client and added Lauren to the roster mid-season. The field team was never told. When Lauren showed up at base camp, the expedition leader didn't recognize her. The client manifest listed 7 climbers. Lauren made 8. She produced paperwork showing the Kathmandu office had added her, and a phone call to the operator produced vague confirmation the money had already been accepted. Lakpa Rangdu, the expedition's lead Sherpa, 36 years old with 9 Everest summits, saw the problem right away. Oxygen allocations, tent assignments, food rations, and Sherpa pairings had all been calculated for 7. Adding an 8th without adjustments meant someone would come up short when it mattered. That's what gets me every time with these stories. The guy with 9 summits flags the problem on day 1, and the answer is basically, figure it out. The first acclimatization rotation through the Khumbu icefall exposed Lauren completely. She clipped her ascender backward twice. She froze on a ladder crossing until a line of climbers stacked up behind her. Her crampon technique alternated between flat footing, where she should have been front pointing, and dragging her feet in ways that snagged the rope. Lakpa corrected her patiently at first, then firmly, then with visible concern. Other clients on the rotation started requesting different group assignments. Nobody wanted to be roped to someone who couldn't keep pace, and the resentment was building quietly across the team. When Lakpa brought it to the expedition leader, Lauren was standing right there and jumped in, insisting her performance was normal for a first rotation. She name-dropped routes in Patagonia and a winter Denali attempt. A client who had actually climbed the Patagonian route later told the guide team that Lauren's descriptions didn't match the terrain. And look, I've seen climbers stretch their resumes before. Everyone adds a little polish. But making up entire routes you've never set foot on while standing next to people who have, that's a different level. The second rotation to Camp 2 at 21,000 feet confirmed everything. Lauren stumbled on flat glacier terrain, burned through water at twice the rate of other clients, and needed rest stops that pushed the group 2 hours behind. The third rotation reached only 22,800 feet, well short of Camp 3 at 23,500. Lauren couldn't hold front point technique on steep ice. Lakpa had to physically guide her boots into placements. They turned back. Lauren had never acclimatized above 23,000 feet. When the summit window opened, the expedition leader barred Lauren from the push. Her response was controlled, but threatening. She would contact the Kathmandu operator, have the guide replaced, and pursue legal action for services not rendered. She appeared to accept the decision. She did not. Lauren tagged along with another team's rope line during the afternoon, pushed to the South Col. In the crowding and wind, Sherpas assumed she belonged to a neighboring expedition. That night, Lakpa found her on the fixed ropes at 27,000 feet, climbing alone in the dark with no Sherpa assigned. Base camp radioed to turn her around, but pulling someone off a fixed rope who won't cooperate at that altitude risks both lives. Lauren refused to go down. They found her body the following afternoon at around 27,800 feet, seated against a rock band above the balcony. Her oxygen mask hung around her neck. Her hands were bare. Her eyes were open. She had never acclimatized above 23,000 feet, and cerebral edema had done what it always does to unprepared bodies. She was 41 years old. The bare hands are the detail I keep coming back to. Severe haste destroys judgment so completely that climbers stop protecting themselves from the cold. The brain can't process danger anymore. She was freezing to death and didn't have the awareness left to care. The Kathmandu operator faced investigation. 2 legitimate clients on the expedition failed to summit because Lauren's presence had thrown off the rotation schedule and squeezed their acclimatization windows. It was May 17, 2016, and the pre-dawn cold at Camp 3 on the Lhotse face held at minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The camp clung to a narrow shelf chopped into the ice at 23,500 feet. Tents anchored by screws driven into blue ice that creaked under thermal stress. Stacy Lusk was 44, from Scottsdale, Arizona, a real estate executive with a legitimate climbing resume. Denali, Aconcagua, multiple Himalayan trekking peaks. She had planned to climb Everest, but missed the permit deadline and lost her guiding slot. She took a discounted Lhotse position instead, accepted on paper, never intended to climb Lhotse. Her climbing Sherpa was Pemba Chotar, 33, with 7 Lhotse summits and 4 on Everest. Small in stature, but his endurance at altitude was something bigger climbers couldn't match. Throughout the expedition, Stacy kept asking detailed questions about the Everest route, where it split from Lhotse, how the ropes were set up above Camp 3, what the traverse across the yellow band looked like. Pemba figured she was just curious. Other Sherpas later called it reconnaissance. I'll be real, when I was putting this story together, the reconnaissance part caught me off guard. This wasn't impulsive. She spent weeks gathering intel on a route she was never supposed to be on. On summit push morning, team climbed above Camp 3 in the dark, at around 24,500 feet, where the Lhotse route continued straight, while the Everest route cut left toward the Geneva Spur. Stacy unclipped from the Lhotse line and clipped onto the Everest traverse rope. Pemba called out right away. She waved him off and kept moving. He followed and told her straight. Her permit was for Lhotse. She had no oxygen cached on the Everest route. No Sherpa support above this point. She'd be arrested on descent. Stacy told him the permit system was a money grab, and she was already past the point of turning back. She called it a money grab. I need you to sit with that. The permit system exists because people die on this mountain every single year, and the woman calling it a scam is about to prove exactly why it exists. Pemba radioed base camp. Every response said the same thing: get her off the route. He blocked the fixed rope at the yellow band and laid out the math. Her oxygen was calculated for a Lhotse summit, not the extra hours Everest would take. Without supply cached above, she'd run out. Stacy pushed past him. Pemba refused to follow. He unclipped from the Everest rope and went back down to the Lhotse line. Stacy was alone on the Everest route, above 25,000 feet. She made it to around 26,200 feet on the Geneva Spur before the oxygen math became undeniable. She turned around, but she'd been above 24,500 feet for hours longer than planned, exhausted, hypoxic, moving through terrain she'd never seen before. On the traverse back, she missed a clip-in point on an exposed section of rope. She tumbled several hundred feet down the face before coming to rest against broken ice. A Sherpa team found her the next morning. Pemba Chotar was questioned by authorities for 2 days. His answers never changed. He warned her, blocked her, radioed for support, and refused to enable the decision. He was cleared, but other Sherpas said he was quieter after that season. 2 days of questioning for a man who did everything right. That part genuinely made me angry. He warned her, he blocked the rope, he called it in, and he still had to sit in a room and justify himself. It was May 18th, 2013, and the Lhotse face gleamed under mid-morning sun like polished blue glass. Fixed ropes running up the face were packed with climbers from multiple teams, each moving at their own pace while Sherpas threaded between them, hauling loads. Nicola Prior was 39, from London, stuck behind a climber who stopped every 15 steps. Her budget expedition ran large groups with barely any Sherpa support, and the pace was set by the slowest person on the team. Nicola was fitter than all of them, and the frustration had been building since the first rotation. She had noticed the faster expedition days earlier: efficient clients, more oxygen, better gear. On summit push day, she left Camp 3 early and fell in behind the faster group. She clipped onto their rope and slotted herself into their line like she belonged. Kanchanuru, the faster expedition's lead Sherpa, 40 with 12 Everest summits, spotted her at a rest stop around 24,800 feet. He checked with his expedition leader by radio. She wasn't on the manifest. His expedition had contributed to the shared route-fixing effort above Camp 3. The oxygen at Camp 4 was set aside for his clients. Her being there threw off the safety math he was running. Nicola accused him of harassment, told him she'd report him if he kept going. I need to be honest, when I got to this part I had to read it again. She's outside any logistics chain, using oxygen she didn't pay for, with no rescue plan if anything goes wrong, and when the lead Sherpa asks her to leave, she threatens to report him. The audacity is hard to overstate. Kancha made a call. He left her, moved his clients forward, radioed her expedition company, and focused on the people he was actually responsible for. Nicola kept going alone, drifting behind teams she didn't belong to, resting when they rested, moving when they moved. Two Sherpas from different expeditions later said they saw her take an oxygen bottle from a cache at Camp 4 that was clearly labeled for another team. I want you to think about that. That bottle was carried to 26,000 feet on someone's back, cached for a client who might need it to survive the descent. And she just grabs it. She ducked into an empty tent on the South Col and rested before the summit push. Using shelter she hadn't arranged and fuel she hadn't paid for, she left for the summit that night, following headlamps in the dark, carrying one oxygen bottle with no spare and no Sherpa keeping track of her. She reached the balcony at 27,600 feet behind the main groups, already hours deep into her single bottle supply. Above the balcony, the math turned fatal. At the flow rate she was using, her single bottle was nearing depletion. The summit was still 1,400 vertical feet above. No spare, no Sherpa carrying extra supply, and nobody on the mountain tracking where she was. Nicola Prior was found at around 28,200 feet, slumped against the fixed rope. Climbers coming down from the summit first assumed she was resting. A Sherpa who checked on her 2 hours later found no pulse. She was 39 years old. Nobody on the entire mountain was tracking her. I keep landing on that because it's the thing that makes budget expeditions so dangerous. She walked away from the only people responsible for her, and nothing existed to catch her before the mountain did. Kanchanuru was questioned about leaving her on the rope. Sherpa teams across the mountain backed his decision without exception. He had protected the clients in his care. Budget operators had been a growing problem on Everest for years. They undercut established companies by stripping services to the minimum. Smaller Sherpa teams, fewer oxygen bottles, less communication gear, and almost no oversight once clients left base camp. For climbers who couldn't afford premium expeditions, they were the only option. But the trade-off was simple. You paid less, got less, and when something went wrong above 26,000 feet, nobody was coming. Nicola's expedition couldn't even confirm she was missing until other teams reported it. It was May 8th, 2017, and Everest Base Camp was bright and still, the sun softening the glacier into a wet sheen. The temperature hit 31 degrees Fahrenheit, mild enough to make the mountain feel almost welcoming. Andrea Farre was 47, from Miami, a hedge fund manager who solved problems with capital. Mountains, she was finding out, didn't respond to money. Her body needed weeks to adapt to altitude, and no wire transfer could speed that up. She had done one rotation to Camp 1, which wiped her out more than expected. The schedule called for 2 more, over 10 days. Andrea saw dead time. The arrangement went through a helicopter company in Kathmandu. Fake a knee injury, get evacuated, have the helicopter land at Camp 2 instead of flying to Kathmandu. She iced and compressed her knee overnight to create swelling. The expedition doctor found inflammation that looked like a soft tissue injury and called for evacuation. I've covered a lot of shortcuts people take on this mountain, but this one is something else. You can buy your way past a lot of things in life, but you cannot buy your way past biology. Red blood cells don't care how much money you have. The helicopter lifted off from base camp and instead of heading to Kathmandu, set down at Camp 2 on the western CWM. Cash to intermediaries ensured the flight log listed a weather diversion near Farich. Andrea stepped onto the glacier at 21,000 feet with a body that had spent one night above 19,000. Her blood hadn't adapted, her lungs hadn't adjusted, her brain hadn't recalibrated. Every system still thought it was at sea level. Sonam Rinjing, 31, her assigned climbing Sherpa with 6 summits, came up with a regular rotation the next day and found Andrea already in her tent. The knee looked fine. Sonam checked with base camp, confirmed the story, and reported what he saw. This woman had not acclimatized. Taking her higher was a medical risk. Andrea waved it off and reminded everyone what she'd paid. They let her try for Camp 3 with close monitoring. At 22,500 feet, altitude her body had zero adaptation for, she got hit with a crushing headache. Her coordination fell apart. Her crampon placements were sloppy. Sonam watched her responses come slower, watched her eyes glaze over, watched acute mountain sickness speed toward something worse. Sonam told her to go down. Andrea refused. She made it to 23,000 feet before she couldn't clip her own ascender without someone guiding her hands. Her words were garbled. She kept fumbling gears she'd used for weeks. Full haze, severe cerebral edema shutting her brain down. Sonam and a second Sherpa started lowering her down the Lhotse face. Andrea turned combative, her dying brain reading rescue as an attack. She swung her arms, fighting them. And here's the thing that wrecks me about HACE. The person you're saving fights you. They don't understand you're helping. Their brain turns rescue into threat, and Sonam is absorbing punches on steep ice, trying to keep this woman alive. Her ice axe caught Sonam in the shoulder. In the same moment, Andrea unclipped her own harness. She slid right away on the steep ice and fell roughly 800 feet before hitting a rock shelf. The injuries were catastrophic. 800 feet. That's roughly the height of a 60-story building, and the only reason it stopped there was because the rock shelf caught her. Without it, the Lhotse face doesn't end for another 2,000 feet. Sonam Rinjing needed surgery in Kathmandu, torn ligaments that never fully healed. He couldn't go back to high-altitude guiding. He ended up doing trekking work in the lower Khumbu at about half the pay, supporting a wife, 2 kids, aging parents, and a younger brother still in school. Half the income. Because a woman from Miami couldn't sit still for 10 days. I don't know how you process that math. Real quick, if you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly invested in these stories. And that's exactly who this channel is for. A like or a subscribe tells the algorithm to keep pushing this kind of content. Alright, back to the mountain. It was April 22nd, 2018, and the trail above La Bouche wound through terrain dotted with memorial cairns, stone pyramids for climbers who never came back. The air at 16,000 feet made conversation tough on the uphills, and the afternoon clouds rolling up the valley brought a damp cold that got into your clothing and stayed. Paige Dunigan was 52, a petroleum executive from Houston, and she moved slowly at the back of her group. Tall and solid, she carried herself like someone used to. Authority, but altitude was stripping that away. Her breathing ran heavier than the other clients. Her rest stops came more often, and her complexion had a grayish tone that her climbing Sherpa picked up on before anyone else. Furba Concha was 29 with 4 summits, young for that number. He'd grown up in Rolwaling and finished a high-altitude medicine program run by a climbing NGO. The training taught him to read signs that most Sherpas picked up through instinct rather than clinical knowledge. He watched Paige closely from day one. Paige's medical clearance was forged. 2 years earlier, she'd had angioplasty. She was on daily cardiac medication. She had paid a cardiologist in Houston to sign a letter certifying her fit for extreme altitude with no issues. Furba noticed the pills first. Every morning, taken in secret from unmarked bottles. On the first rotation, Paige's oxygen saturation dropped lower and bounced back slower than it should have. Her lips went bluish at 19,500 feet. On the second rotation to Camp 2, Furba picked up an irregular pulse, racing, then pausing, then racing again. He reported it. Paige pulled out the cardiologist's letter. The expedition doctor went with the paperwork. Paige found out Furba had raised concerns. She told Furba, right there in front of other Sherpas, that if Furba's interference cost her the summit, she'd make sure Furba never worked for the company again. Paige had connections to the expedition's investors. That kind of threat carried real weight in a community where seasonal work decided whether families got through the winter. This part is hard for me to talk about calmly because the power dynamics are so ugly. A 29-year-old Sherpa catches a legitimate medical red flag, reports it like he's trained to, and gets threatened with career destruction by the patient. And the system lets it happen because Paige has paperwork and connections. Furba stopped filing formal reports. He didn't stop watching. During the third rotation, he saw Paige palming white tablets under her tongue, nitroglycerin for acute cardiac relief. Summit push, May 20th. Paige got to Camp 4, gray-faced, breathing hard even on supplemental oxygen. They left at midnight. She climbed slowly but steadily, reaching the balcony at 27,600 feet, nearly an hour behind the group. Above that, her pace fell off even more. Each step took visible seconds of effort. At around 28,100 feet, Paige pressed her hand to her chest. She doubled over her ice axe. Her breathing became shallow and erratic. She collapsed onto the fixed rope. The cardiac condition her forged documents had hidden finally met the altitude, cold, and exertion it needed. Farre went through Paige's pack looking for emergency meds and found everything the clearance letter denied: beta blockers, nitroglycerin, aspirin, a pulse oximeter, a full cardiac pharmacy, 28,000 feet. She carried the evidence of her own lie the entire climb and still handed over that forged clearance. I genuinely don't know what to do with that level of denial. Farre attempted chest compressions at 28,000 feet in the dark on a steep slope. The altitude made it nearly impossible. He managed less than a minute before exhaustion, and the lack of any response made the outcome clear. Paige Dunigan was 52. The investigation pulled Paige's full medical records. The physician in Houston lost his license. Farre finished the season but never went back to high-altitude work. He told friends what happened at 28,000 feet changed something in him that didn't come back. I want to take a second here because I sometimes get asked why I keep making these videos. It's not about just being a source of income, and honestly, the answer changes depending on the week. Sometimes it's because the stories genuinely keep me up at night, and making the video is the only way I can get them out of my head. Other times it's because I read the comments and realize people actually learn from this stuff. But if I'm being really honest, the main reason is the Sherpas. Their side almost never gets told, and I think that matters more than any of us realize. It was April 29, 2016, and the Khumbu icefall groaned in the afternoon heat. At 29 degrees Fahrenheit, meltwater trickling through the glacier was undermining ice structures that cracked and settled all through the night. Above, seracs tilted at angles that looked like decisions waiting to be made. Vanessa Holt was 36, from Sydney, a former fitness influencer whose follower count had peaked around 85,000 and dropped to about 40,000. Everest was supposed to turn that around, but before leaving Australia, she'd set up a financial backstop. 3 overlapping adventure insurance policies from different providers, each covering evacuation and rescue costs. She believed the overlap would let her recover far more than the rescues actually cost. Her climbing Sherpa was Ang Cheering, 35 8 Everest summits, from Kunde. Known for one thing above all, he was always the first to move when someone needed help. 14 seasons of rescue work at altitude. That instinct was exactly what Vanessa was counting on. The first staged emergency came at Camp 1. Vanessa reported severe abdominal pain. A helicopter was called. She got flown to Kathmandu, examined, and they found nothing wrong. She filed an insurance claim within 48 hours and was back at base camp 3 days later. The second came at Camp 2. She hyperventilated on purpose and put on symptoms that looked like early-stage pulmonary edema. The expedition doctor found no fluid in her lungs but couldn't rule out early HAPE at that altitude. She got evacuated again. Second claim filed. Ang Cheering helped with the Camp 2 response, hauling supplemental oxygen across the glacier to the landing zone, adding wear on his body during an already brutal season. Between evacuations, other Sherpas noticed Vanessa bounced back too fast and showed no leftover symptoms. She came back each time with a readiness that looked more like planning than recovery. Ang Cheering told the expedition leader what he suspected, but the leader had no medical grounds to cut her. And that's the part that really gets under my skin with this one. Everyone suspected. The Sherpa saw it, the expedition leader saw it, the pattern was right there. But you can't definitively prove someone isn't sick at 21,000 feet, so nobody could stop her. She found a gap in the system and ran it 3 times. The third staged emergency was the most dangerous. At Camp 3, 23,500 feet on the Lhotse face, Vanessa took medications that brought on vomiting and a racing heart. At that altitude, the symptoms were impossible to tell apart from severe acute mountain sickness. She called for help. Ang Cheering heard the radio call from above Camp 3, where he was pre-staging oxygen for the summit push. He came down to her within 30 minutes, moving fast over steep ice the way someone does after doing it dozens of times. What he found looked real. Vomiting, racing pulse, flushed skin. He started lowering her on the fixed ropes. During the descent, wind picked up on the exposed face, gusting to 35 miles per hour. The rescue became a real emergency, no matter whether the patient's condition was genuine. Ang Cheering was managing a body on 45-degree ice in worsening weather at 23,000 feet. At around 22,800 feet, the ice anchor he was waiting fractured. The screw pulled through a surface layer weakened by freeze-thaw cycling. Ang Cheering dropped 30 feet before his backup anchor caught. His body slammed into the ice wall, and the force went straight through his lower left leg. Compound fracture. Tibia and fibula both snapped, bone showing through his climbing suit. Bone through the suit. And what kills me is this is a man who was pre-staging oxygen for other people when that radio call came in. He wasn't even supposed to be on that section of the face. He went because that's what he always does. Vanessa, still clipped into the lowering system, slid 50 feet before the rope caught her. She slammed into a rock, outcropping at speed. The impact fractured her pelvis, broke ribs, and ruptured something internal. A second rescue team got to them within 2 hours. Ang cheering, conscious with his leg shattered, talked the arriving Sherpas through the anchor setup, which screws were holding, which ropes were loaded, how to get Vanessa off the face without collapsing what was left. They got Vanessa down to Camp 2 by nightfall. The internal bleeding had been working for hours. Her skin was gray, her pulse weak, her breathing shallow. Conditions wouldn't allow a helicopter until morning. She died in the medical tent at Camp 2 before dawn. She was 36. Her third emergency on Everest was the only real one, and it killed her. The 2 insurance claims she'd already filed triggered a review. Both insurers investigated and denied coverage. The full scope of the fraud came out in the weeks that followed. Ang Chiring went through 3 surgeries in Kathmandu over 6 months. The fracture healed, but the joint damage was permanent. He couldn't climb above base camp anymore. 14 years of being the first to show up when someone needed help, ended by someone who never needed help at all. His family lost more than half their income. Western climbers who knew him put together a fund that covered the surgeries, but couldn't replace what the mountain had given him. A reporter asked him the following year if he was angry at Vanessa Holt. He said anger takes energy he was using for other things. When asked what those things were, he said he was learning to walk on flat ground the way he used to walk on ice. One step at a time, trusting the surface beneath him. I've ended a lot of these videos and moved on, but that answer is one I can't let go of. Learning to walk on flat ground the way he used to walk on ice. 14 years on that mountain, and that's how it ends. 6 climbers, 6 lies, and the people who paid the highest price weren't the ones who told them.